Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crystal Core Radio Podcast. Brian and Chris here bringing you three big topics today. We're going to be talking about WoW's classic server, Kerfuffle. We're going to be talking about New World's Fresh Start servers, so a lot of server talk here at the start of the show. And then we're going to round it out with the Final Fantasy XIV nerfing Savage, which happened with patch 6.21, reducing some of the experience. And we've got some notes and some reasons behind that as well that we can kind of cover and talk for you. If you guys are listening to the audio MP3 version of this podcast, it comes out a couple of days after the live shows. We hope and encourage you to join us for the live shows to help drive the conversation as we delve into these topics themselves. But beyond that, also give this show a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. All the links are in the description for you to find if you need, if you're watching the live show and or watching these as highlights over here on the YouTube. So today's our first topic. It's going to be a big one. I think it's the classic WoW servers. This is essentially the big kerfuffle that's going on. Wrath of the Lich King right now, classic, is making its way into the game itself. And Chris, you're the WoW expert here. You're our WoW guy. You played originally through Wrath's pre-launch event. I think that's one of the reasons why this is so popular. And we're talking about 7 million people, like maybe more, like really popular going on. What's the status? What do we need to know? And let's talk about it.
So, Wrath of the Lich King Classic, Wrath of the Lich King launch was one of my favorite MMO launches of all time. TBC is probably one of my favorite expansions to an MMO of all time. And like Endwalker and Shadowbringers are up there. But as far as like the actual launch, I was in college when Lich King launched. I had an exam that day. I was competing for like server first. The exam was in the building next to my dorm, and servers went live, and I was ahead. I was doing great. And then I literally sprinted across. It was a 25 question exam, something like that. And I literally sat down in the front row. I said, "Can I have my test now?" And he goes, "Sure." And he handed it to me, and I filled it out. And he was handing out the tests up the rows. And so he just handed a stack to each row. They'd pass it across. And before he even got to the top of the stairs, I handed my exam back into him. And he goes, "Do you have a question?" I said, "No, I'm done." And I sprinted out the room, and I'd fallen behind, and I was trying to catch up. So I did not end up with server first, even for my class, but I was right behind him. But I lost that like 20 minutes. And it ended up just being this really fun early expansion experience, and going and running the dungeons with all the other people that were that far ahead. And like, it just was something really special to me. And it was at a time in my life that I could do something that special. You don't, like, when you're a kid, you have bedtimes and stuff like that. You share your computer with siblings or whatever. And when you're an adult, you usually have other commitments. And so it just fell at a time that, like, it was a great game. And it was at a time in my life that I was able to receive it in that way. And it's a really cherished memory. And I think I'm not alone for that. It was a huge growth time. They had just come off the Burning Crusade. So all these people who'd said, "I don't know about WoW," were finally breaking down and giving it a shot. We're liking it. So for many people, it was their first expansion launch. And then that brought in a whole new wave. And there's a ton of people still to this day that Lich King was their very first expansion. So a lot of people who missed launch, or people who missed Lich King, want to go back and experience what they missed, as well as for many of us, we have those fond memories and we want to relive them. So there is a lot of pressure riding on this, not to mention with the fact that Cataclysm for many people was the beginning of WoW maybe losing its edge. And so it could be the last big classic launch that they feel obligated to kind of go do. So they really don't want to miss this one. Now, with that, we had the Scourge event go through. And now we are going into kind of this pre-patch time, and people are being encouraged to do Death Knights. You get a mount in retail if you do the Death Knight storyline. And so populations are growing. They're getting hit with, the number I've seen was 7 million people trying to play the game simultaneously. Not all in the game, because the game can't take 7 million people. And so they're trying to do all sorts of things. They're offering free server transfers. They've now rolled out new realms that they're calling Fresh Start realms, only for people that are coming back that are willing to roll a new character. They're trying all sorts of things to offer a better experience. But at the end of the day, there is no amount of Surge servers that are going to prepare them for the 26th. The 26th is going to be a disaster. But in a good way. And so, like, I'm seeing all sorts of people say people deserve to be fired for this, heads need to roll. But all I can think is, like, you worked in IT, and, like, imagine you were in charge, or were in a position where you were helping run all these servers, and they said, "Hey, we're actually making so much profit and have so much growth right now, but you guys aren't keeping up with current customers. So we're going to go with less of you. We're going to fire half the team." Like, I guess, so that's kind of catch you up on the situation. Now, from the IT side, like, how does that all sound when you have this big surge?
So in that regards, right? Because when it comes down to search, we're talking about this is usually in the IT world, development world. We're talking about like scaling. Are we scaling out or are we scaling up? And that's actually something we'll be talking about in the next subject with New World and its fresh start servers. Something we've been kind of covering here on the channel again. But in this regards, right? Like I think a lot of what you just described is a good, interesting reason when you start to bring back the power and the memeing of you think you do, but you don't. Like we have this ability to remember the past so incredibly fondly that we also tend to forget some of the hurdles. I hear this all the time over on Ginger World. Like when I'm talking about New World, all in all, like the number one biggest complaint, and it's not an invalid complaint, like this is a very valid complaint. Why are the servers only so large to support 2,000 people? And they've since up to 2,500, and I'm betting that we're going to see them continue to test that scale, right? Because they actually built their architecture on AWS, a platform designed for both scaling out and scaling up. And so when it comes down to it, like you see this natural frustration because then you have games and that do have a queue, but that queue is so invisible that you start to question like the archaic design of it. Now, when we look at the history of MMOs, originally with Ultima Online, it wasn't designed. They were all hoping it would be all in the same world. But when they started actually looking at the technical requirements, that's when we started this. That's actually when they went with shards servers. They even built it into their story of the reason why they had to do it, with the hope that at some point the technology would exist so they wouldn't need that. And we see things like this in Destiny. When you go to play Destiny, especially with crossplay, cross save right now, you're not picking a world, you're not doing whatever. Your friends can find you, and that in the back end it just handles it. And I think essentially when you start to have experiences that do not require a server, like you can actually hit a queue in Destiny. Whenever there's a mad rush, there is a queue, but that queue and you only end up seeing it typically on like expansion days, right? So naturally, right. But that gets you in, and then you're not sitting here picking worlds and picking servers. Like in this case, this is a reminder of the technology at the time. And no, heads shouldn't roll when you have 7 million people want to play into it. The question though does come into, how do you scale in that degree? Because in a month or 2 months or 7 months, it's not 7 million people. You don't want
700,000, 70,000.
You're right.
7,000.
And you want to have just, so in a way, it's like, how do you manage hype? And I think essentially the solution is being built as a part of these new or modern MMOs. But what is classic about classic is that was a thing. That was always a thing. Worlds can get full. Like I remember logging in. When I went to go play the original classic launch, like we were trying to get on one server and we just couldn't. Like it's just like you would have to stay logged in, and it reminds you of the limitations of, how some of these things were designed. There's a beauty in that, and I would actually say like this is more of a sign of success than anything else. But they're not going to go and heck, maybe there's also still a hardware limitation. We've seen that within 14 over the last like 2 years of like, well, like we've ordered the servers. Like, what do you guys want? Like Silicon isn't printing itself.
Yeah, I do think in vanilla they rolled out some of the retail sharding, which allows them to create kind of layers of a world. But they ultimately still wanted you to exist within your world. Your world has access to its auction house. Those are the players you queue for dungeons and raids with. So like you kind of created parallel realities within parallel realities, and those could kind of collapse up and down as demand. But one of the things these games really struggle with is these mass login queues. The login server tends to be this one kind of bouncer at the door. And even if there's room on the other side of the door and there's room outside the door, only so many people can go through the door at a time. And so the bouncer's job is to make sure we're not trying to walk through the door 4 wide. And so like there is a little bit of a limit there, just to kind of get you safely in the door.
Yeah.
Within Final Fantasy, with the Endwalker launch, we actually saw where what was happening is occasionally the line outside of the building, waiting just for the privilege of getting into the game, that was getting jumbled up. And so it felt like you would make it all the way and you're like, oh, there's the door right there. We're almost in. And then somebody would randomly kick you out of line. And then you would have to go get in the end. And now the line was even longer. And so I think that made it much more frustrating than saying, it says I've got 10 hours until my login window. At the end of my login window, my little buzzer for the restaurant's going to buzz. As long as I go to talk to the host stand within 10 minutes, they'll have my table for me. I think that's something that we're all familiar with. And many of us would say, you know what? It says 10 hours. I'm going to go ahead and queue. Maybe I work from home or I have flexibility on my hours.
Yeah.
I'll get 10 hours. I'll get 9 hours worth of work done. Check in on it. Cool. It still says an hour left. Do some dishes, have some dinner. And then a little alarm will go off that'll notify my phone app, and then I can go log in. That would be a world where many of us, while we would be frustrated at the lack of supply of what appears, since it's digital, what appears an infinite good. It's not. They live on physical servers, but it appears infinite, would be fine. But that's not how these tend to work. They tend to be filled with people saying, and I got in, and then like 5 minutes later I disconnected. Thankfully, WoW does tend to have like some disconnect protection, where if you disconnect, as long as you log back in within a certain number of minutes, that way if you have like an ISP outage or something, you're not back to the beginning of the line. As opposed to 14 at Endwalker launch didn't have that. So like when Jesse Cox accidentally logged out, that was it. That was the end of stream.
When I got kicked out, when 14 won the best community award, and then 5 seconds later I got kicked out after waiting in line, like that would guys, that's it for tonight. And Endwalker's launch, the only issue in my mind wasn't the queue. It was the queue wasn't like you'd randomly get kicked out of the queue. Like, and the only way to know is if you were actually sitting there, and that was unsustainable. So I ended up naturally falling way behind, but that sorted itself out. They've discovered some 1.0 bugs. So Yoshi P was, saying, oh, we fixed all the 1.0 code. You thought you did. You thought you did. Now, over on Twitch chat, actually, there's 2 questions on Twitch. I wish I could highlight them here on the YouTube side, but Thrash says, servers being flooded because popular streamers choose a server also doesn't help. That's a whole new phenomenon that has happened since this has happened. What's your take on, obviously, like popular streamers and server populations, especially as it relates to a launch like this?
So the hard thing is you want to be part of that, right? So when like Preach has a house party with Zepla, that's an incredible thing to go be a part of. And through things like Data Center Visit and World Visit, those things don't require that you go out of your way except for that day and date. But on most games, that's not a technology that exists. And so if you ever want to be around when Asmongold is, trying to drown his free character and people are all sitting in the lava healing him, if you ever want to experience that, you have to be on that server. And so it really encourages this idea that, like, are you willing to struggle uphill every single time you log in for the off chance that there's going to be some event you want to be a part of that kind of augments your game, this kind of optional DLC, as it were. And since these are social games, that's something that enough people will be a part of that then those people's friends have to play with them. And, right? So like, I want to follow this popular streamer, so I pick a server. And then that means if my brothers want to play with me, they have to pick my same server. And so it ripples out and it causes huge population problems. If they could scale out laterally, if they could say, you know what, for the leveling purpose, if you would just somehow let me level on a random server and I could interact with my bank, but I couldn't interact with the auction house. I couldn't PvP. I couldn't use Duty Finder. Or if I did use Duty Finder, it kept me on that server. If there were these kind of like borrowed servers that we could all hop onto, and then as population dropped off, as people who said, I just wanted to level the cap and then I was probably going to be done anyway, as those people fade out, which will happen through no fault of the game, that's just part of it, then you could kind of scale those back down. Because if you don't build that in as some sort of guest server type thing that spins up as you spin out laterally, you end up with New World's problem, where we've always thought, man, if only we had like infinite servers available. And Amazon's like, hold my beer. We have infinite servers.
We got it.
So New World spun them out. So they solved it, right? Except that then all of a sudden you spread too little jam across too much bread. And so all of a sudden you had servers with 6 people on them. And it's like, well, none of this functions.
Yeah.
So ideally then it would self-consolidate back down, but you would have to be from the future to know how much self-consolidation you want to do.
Did I tell you, like, and this is just something that I thought was like their biggest marketing failure this year, was they had a whole like login to New World for free, kind of campaign. And as a part of it, they spun up like all of these like free servers, and a player logging in for free could create a character on any of the existing servers. But they ended up spinning up like 20, like just clean servers that you could just go play on. And it was like, you go look at the population of the servers and they're like 4 people, 3 people. Because it's like,
it's just a Minecraft world. You just run for days, and never see anybody.
And never see anybody. I was like, they're not getting the like a real experience of the game itself. And it was just like, oh man, did they expect like this rush of people with with the free to play weekend. Meaning though that then if they do that again, ideally it'll be interesting to see if they do something like that, or if it's like we spun up one free server, like one server that's just here for free for people to come play on, and we'll transfer you off after if needed. And then you go into the actual population where the game's playing, and so much there. And also, the other question we got was from Jace. Did you actually pass your exam?
I did. So it's actually the single exam in all of college I studied most for, because I usually used flashcards. That's always been my preferred studying method.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the point where once I knew all the flashcards, my study group didn't like when I was doing the answers. They're like, you know it, let us answer the question. We'd go out to lunch or something, and we would all do flashcards. There was a little group of 4 or 5 of us. Brian's brother was in there with me. And they were like, Chris, why don't you ask the questions? You clearly know it. And I was like, no, I'm trying to answer it for speed, because I would cut them off. They would be normally we wait. Does everybody know it? Okay, I'm going to say it. And then we would all study together. And I was trying to answer for speed. So I would sit there and flip the cards because I knew that it was coming out on launch day, and I knew the exam was on launch day. And so the goal was to be able to complete the exam, not only and do well, but the goal was to be able to complete the exam in as little time as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the single exam in all of college I studied most for, because I wanted to be able to blitz the questions.
Yeah.
And it was fast. Like it was just do. I did really well on it. To the point where I'm sure like my mother would have been like, why can't you study for all exams like that? And it's like, because I don't care. Like I didn't do it for the exam. I did it because my druid was going to be the first druid to the newest, highest level.
And then now it's like you're probably not going to do that rush because you're going to be celebrating your 10-year anniversary.
Yeah,
once again, his opportunity to be the world's first has been robbed from his clutches.
No, people have been prepping for this for.
Oh yeah.
Now people are going to have it worked down to the second.
Now Thresh,
like, I got a crit. I got 2 crits in a row. Okay, that puts me half a second ahead.
I really wish Thrash was over here, like putting these points over on YouTube, so I could like throw them up just on the screen just to help kind of drive the conversation. But Thrash follows up, says it's thorny one for sure. As someone who works in cloud infrastructure, there are some challenges with implementing elasticity. I think that all the MMOs that I've played, ESO does it as well. As its mega server as well under the hood is very transparent. And that's actually, I brought up Destiny. I think essentially ESO is another like more classical MMORPG that structures it, because that's what we tend to hear, like especially somebody coming from ESO. It ends up being this interesting fact, because once a standard is really set, like when you start to go look at other games, you know, you're like, why doesn't this game do this? Because that is such a comforting feature. But to counteract the mega server, there are plenty of people. We've seen them in 14. I've seen people even in 14's world argue against world visit, argue against data center visit, because they have this clear idea of what it means to have server identity. Now, I believe that server identity has evolved into data center identity in terms of like, we have data center reputations, right? Like, you know, crystal is crystal, right? You know, you have those kind of mindsets. What are your thoughts?
It's fun to be the most powerful or the best at something, and if it's all one server, only one person gets to be that person. This is the argument with if you got to pick how big of a school system your kids were a part of. My mom and my dad both grew up in the middle of nowhere, Midwest states, and they both grew up in what are like Texas, like I don't know what they were numbered there, but they would call them like 1A and 2A school districts where, you know, you got to be the lead in a play, and you were on the football team, and you were, on the basketball team, and you were trying out swimming. So you were going to get to be on the JV team. And so like you got to do everything, and you're like, oh, well, I'm having to work that out with the debate schedule because I'm going to the debate tournament. Like they were in everything. I went to school where I graduated with over 1,000 people in my graduating class. And the group behind me, I think, was going to break 2,000 people just in my graduating class. And so the percentage of the total population that got to be on a sports team and got to see playtime was very, very, very small. Now, to that group, we got incredible resources. So I was in athletics, and so I was given incredible facilities to practice in. And we had an indoor football field, and we had an indoor, like we had a gym that rivals gyms I could pay a lot more than I'm willing to be a part of now. Like we had all of this incredible resources thrown at us because it was the resources on behalf of everybody being thrown at a very select few. So there's kind of an argument either way. Which one would you want to raise your kids in? And this is which one would you want your MMO to be in? Being on a small population server, being on a large population, that's a nice granularity of choice as opposed to one big mega server.
Mhm.
I wish there was a way to hybrid it. I wish there was a way to kind of have a home server. And so this is the
Mhm.
size community I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And then when I partner up, when I queue for a duty, try to pair me with that group. And then after that, maybe jump out to what like WoW calls a battle group, right? Jump me out to like my sister servers. And then after that, filter out and filter out and filter out. Because ultimately, what I don't want is a 30-minute queue just because I'm up at 4 a.m. and I can't sleep and I want to run a dungeon. I want to run with anybody at that point. But it is nice to see, like, I think I played with this brain guy before. So I would really prefer it to have maybe some sort of priority or preference system. And ideally that would even work out to where like that would help you have more effective blacklists and things like that. But MMOs don't do that. They tend to fall in camp A or camp B.
Yeah.
And you live with the pros and cons.
And when we also talk about, like, I guess MMOs that really seem to do it in a really positive way, Guild Wars 2 absolutely has to be brought into the conversation, because Guild Wars 2 makes it, you have a server and it relates to certain game type modes, world versus world, things like that. But then within the game itself, it's just play with whoever. Like, their goal, especially in terms of open world content, is all about funneling as many people into an instance of that version of the open world, so it feels like an MMO, so it feels populated, so that there's things and people to do the things that are going on in the open world, as that is kind of a critical component to a core aspect of that game. And that's something that I honestly would hope to see for New World. That's honestly why I'm like, I hope to see that even in 14's case. And I do wonder if at some point down this next 10 years, if we see them kind of say, hey, we no longer need Eureka and Bozia to be a part of the instance server. We're just going to make that actually a zone, a piece of content within the main game. And literally just anybody who goes there gets funneled in, so you're always being match made into, we're going to fill this zone with as many people as possible. So there's that experience to be had for sure. So it's gonna be interesting to see. Obviously, like, it is classic, so your key point of like 7,700,000, 7,000, 70. It's
most
like
people just want to taste.
Yeah, they want to relive that moment, or relive a moment that they heard people talk about in such beauty, such remembrance in a way.
Ulduar is one of the most beloved raid tiers. I bet the number of people that clear Ulduar is going to be crazy. Because it's and like the number of people who stick around to clear the Lich King, that's going to be a big part of this. Right there's going to be these moments that people always wanted to be a part of. And people say like after Kata it's dead, but there were still moments. Like Firelands was a great raid tier. By the time we get into Pandaria, challenge mode dungeons was a really neat moment in small man content that never got repeated. After we move out of that, like each Warlords of Draenor, like now that you know what's coming, I think you could really leverage the garrison system and have a lot of fun in it. And I think there's a lot of content in it, but the content pacing was a struggle. But Classic has had the ability to rewrite content pacing. So, even when we get to that, I think Legion, when people who missed the Mage Tower then, and want to do it back like as it was, as they've kind of re-released that, like I think Classic is going to continue to allow people to relive these moments. The question is, how do they tune it? How do they release it? And how do they handle the fact that it's a surge followed by a valley?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see. Overall, I think the streaming conversation and big streamers are an interesting factor into MMORPGs that both drive hype and at the same time might end up, causing pain in that regards, because it's like at some point you just sometimes want to play, but if there's, and that's where even if you can't play, streaming can also be kind of that a light way of like, oh, you're in the game. We see that happen all the time. Actually, when I was playing Endwalker and people couldn't get in, a lot of people were like, I'm here, he's not doing spoilers, thank you for this, because now at least while I'm in queue or while I know I can't play, it feels exciting. I'm a part of the hype. I'm a part of this excitement. But that is, those are my thoughts. Chris, do you have any final things before we take our kind of our transition into the next topic?
No, best of luck to those of you on the 26th. My advice would be don't take off work. If you refuse to do that, then take off work and have a backup plan. Have another game lined up. Have something else going on in your life. There's a lot of great games in Game Pass right now. It's a great time to be in 14 as we prepare to go into 625. Guild Wars is doing awesome stuff right now. New World's doing. There's pick something else that you can play when inevitably you can't play what you plan to play. The 26th will be a disaster, but not because something is going wrong, but because too much is going right. because you had an idea of some fun you wanted to have, and you were far from alone in that idea. That's the problem. It's a good problem. That you picked a game that is just that exciting to play right now.
Absolutely. Well, guys, if you are enjoying these videos, be sure to like and subscribe, and also check out the Discord. Get a part of our community game nights. We play a bunch of different MMORPGs, and the Discord is the greatest way to connect beyond just hanging out on these live streams over on Twitch and on YouTube. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take a light stretch break and kind of stretch our legs, get a good feel. We encourage you guys to do the same. And then when we come back here in a minute or two, we're going to talk about New World's Fresh Start servers, and then coming up later after the next topic, we're going to talk about Final Fantasy XIV's nerf to the Savage Raid, which we haven't seen actually something like that happen since ARR. So